Okay, there is an absurd amount of scrap in Lethal Company, but I'm going to be ranking every single piece of scrap based on value, weight, how many hands it takes to carry, and if it's conductive. The tier list is in order from left to right, left being the highest in the tier and right being the lowest in the tier. At the top of F tier is the Tattered metal sheet. The Tattered metal sheet is a very common item on the easier moons and has one of the worst values in the game. This combined with its 26 pound weight, which is heavier than bottles, makes it a scrap you should probably skip over unless there's nothing else left. F tier. Also in F tier, even worse than the metal sheet, is the Whoopie Cushion. The Whoopie Cushion has similar value to the metal sheet, but is weightless, so it should be better, but I can't tell you the amount of times someone has left this thing on the floor of the ship and then stepped on it, alerting eyeless dogs and killing everyone. So because the Whoopie Cushion is dangerous to store on the ship and pretty much worthless in value, it's not really worth picking up. F tier. Swiftly moving on to D tier, at the top are cookie mold pans. Another scrap that's fairly common on the easy moons, and to be honest, I just see this thing as a complete upgrade to the metal sheet. Maybe that's just because they look similar, but the cookie pan is worth twice as much, weighs 10 pounds less and isn't conductive. So it's going at the top of D tier. Next in D tier, which is actually going to be a tier below the cookie pan, just because of how I've structured this, is candy. Candy pretty much only spawns on Dine and Rend, and is extremely rare. If you find this rare scrap, what are you rewarded with, you might ask? A hairbrush. And what I mean by that is candy has identical stats to a hairbrush. It's not good, it's not unique, it's pretty much just a reskinned hairbrush, and it's not like the hairbrush was an interesting piece of scrap to begin with. D tier. Moving down in D tier is of course the hairbrush. Obviously these two are going to be side by side since I ranked these based on their stats, and these two are the same. It's not conductive, it weighs 11 pounds, and you'll probably drop it for a better piece of scrap within 30 seconds. Just like candy. D tier. Next in D tier are flasks. Now flasks are slightly higher value than hairbrushes and candy, so why did I place it lower? Well, with the roughly $10 extra value it offers, it also comes with an extra 8 pounds of weight and is for some reason conductive. Despite being made of glass, whatever the case, that's what keeps it from the top of D tier. Moving on down in D tier are egg beaters. Egg beaters are pretty much on par with flasks. They are worth slightly less on average, but weigh 8 pounds less. But they're still conductive and may be worthwhile depending on what other loot there is, but it just doesn't belong any higher on the list. Next scrap in D tier are V-type engines. Engines surprisingly weigh less than flasks. They are worth slightly more, but they're a two-handed item, which is a really big factor when ranking these. It's actually pretty hard to measure usefulness of scrap when you're dealing with two completely different types pretty much. Let me know if you think I should make separate tier lists for two-handed items and single-handed items in the future. Anyway, engines are D tier material. We're near the bottom of D tier now, and this is where I'm going to put big bolts. Big bolts are one of those scraps you see everywhere, from experimentation to Titan. They're very common and always going to help you meet your quota. When you can't find any other scrap, they will come in clutch. And they sort of feel like a staple and an iconic scrap in the early game. That doesn't mean they're good though. In fact, they are just less valuable flasks. Same weight as a flask, both are conductive, big bolts are just worth less. And finally, at the bottom of D tier are steering wheels. I'm going to be honest, I think I've maybe seen like 2 of these in total, maybe 3. They only spawn on 3 moons and aren't even common. Not to mention the steering wheel is basically just a big bolt that's worth slightly less and weighs slightly less. But there's almost no difference. Kind of like the hairbrush and candy situation, this is just a rarer big bolt. With D tier done, we can finally move on to some scrap that will actually be worth your time and will make the company happy with your performance. The best scrap in C tier are the mask variants. These things are pretty much everywhere on the 3 hard moons, and they aren't worthless either, coming in at $28 to $52, very similar value to the V-type engines. The dramatic masks are essentially a single-handed V-type engine that's 5 pounds lighter and not conductive. Of course, the masks are the only scrap in the game that could kill you, but I didn't let this affect the ranking because as long as you don't put the mask on, it's fine. Top of C tier they go. Moving down C tier in second place are plastic fishers. non-conductive, weightless, and worth just a little less than a V-type engine. The plastic fish is generally a good find and is worth picking up on pretty much every moon. Decent value with no risk is always a good thing. C tier. Another item with decent value and no risk is the remote. Stats wise, the remote is almost a complete copy of the plastic fish, but it does have a unique ability to toggle the light inside the ship, which is kind of cool. But other than that, it's an overall pretty good piece of scrap and worth picking up. C tier. Moving down C tier, we have Toothpaste. Toothpaste exclusively spawns on the hard moons, Rand, Dine and Titan. It's weightless and non-conductive just like the remote and plastic fish, but Toothpaste does have a lower minimum value, so it won't always be worth as much, which is why it's a little bit lower, but there's barely any difference. C tier. Going down C tier again is the pill bottle. The pill bottle is pretty much a direct copy of Toothpaste. It spawns on the same 3 moons but has a lower maximum value, making it slightly worse. Also, they make my imaginary friends disappear, which is pretty sad. C tier. Another C tier scrap is the tea kettle. The tea kettle is actually worth more than the masks, but it's so far down C tier compared to them purely because it weighs 21 pounds and is conductive. It's pretty inconvenient to find one of these, but they are worth a lot for a single-handed item. They definitely fall off on the later moons because they are replaced by lighter items worth a similar amount if not more. C tier. Near the bottom of C tier are large axles. These things are everywhere, especially on the early moons, and are pretty good at the start. They are essentially tea kettles that weigh slightly less, but are two-handed. They are the same value, so the tea kettle is better purely because it's single-handed, and the axle doesn't even come close to the scrap on the higher end of C tier, so it's going to go right near the bottom of C tier. And right at the bottom of C tier is the dustpan. See, the dustpan is one rank above the cookie mold tray, and they are very similar. The dustpan is worth slightly less, but the trade-off is it's weightless, rather than the cookie mold pan, which weighs 16 pounds. Apparently, dustpans only spawn on experimentation, so they aren't going to be scrap you'll run into very often. Bottom of C tier. Alright, now we're moving on to scrap that is almost always worth picking up and can save a run sometimes. At the very top of B tier is the old phone. Stats wise, the old phone has very high value for a single hand item, at $48 to $64. It only weighs 5 pounds and isn't conductive, making it a very good find. It also has some lore implications, as it plays a female scream, preceded by a dial tone when picking it up, which is pretty cool. B tier. Next scrap in B tier is the toy robot. While the toy robot does have a higher value than the old phone, it weighs 21 pounds, is conductive, and makes this really annoying sound that can and will alert dogs to your position. So it's slightly higher value than the old phone, but it comes with more risks and downsides as well. B tier. Moving down B tier again, we have the brass bell. The brass bell is a bit of a classic, I feel. It's always a good find when you see one of these, and it's always decent value. It's worth a little less than the toy robot, weighs a little more and is still conductive, so it's going one rank below the robot in B tier. Next in B tier is the rubber duck. The rubber duck is a bit of a weird one. It can be either worse than the Whoopie Cushion or an S tier scrap that saves the run. It can be valued from $2 up to $100 and has no weight and no other downside. Because of the scan feature that's in the game, you can just scan any duck you find, and if it's worth a high amount, pick it up. If the game didn't have scanning, and you could only see the value once you were on the ship, I think it would rank a lot lower. But for now, it's going in the middle of B tier. Moving down B tier, we have the red soda. Red soda is very similar to the rubber duck. It can range from $18 to $90, but it ranks slightly lower than the rubber duck because it has weight and is conductive. B tier. Also in B tier is the Magic 7 Ball. The Magic 7 Ball is another bit of scrap that you would almost always pick up. It's high value but has a weight of 16 pounds, which is a little weird. 16 pounds is usually the heaviest a bowling ball will ever be, and this is a little Magic 8 Ball that's not even made of metal because it's not conductive. Either way, it's pretty good value and has no risk, so B tier it goes. Moving down B tier, we have the coffee mug. The coffee mug is another good value scrap with little weight and no other risks or downsides. It's worth more than a V-type engine, is single-handed, non-conductive and only weighs 5 pounds, which really goes to show that there's a drastic difference between scraps and their quality. B tier. Near the bottom of B tier are Pickles. The jar of Pickles is just the magic 8 ball, but with less value. While they do spawn on different moons, I don't take that into account when ranking these. Pickles have the same weight as the magic 8 ball and are non-conductive and single-handed. Same item, slightly less value, Pickles go at the bottom of B tier. The second last scrap in B tier are bottles. Bottles are another classic item that seem to always be there when you need a bit extra to hit quota, but they have a consistently decent value of $44 to $56. They are conductive and weigh 19 pounds, making them a decent two-handed item. Definitely better than the large axle and V-type engine, but not quite as good as some of the two-handed items in A tier. Bottles are somewhere in the middle, and are pretty good. B tier. And at the bottom of B tier are chemical jugs. Chemical jugs spawn exclusively on Val, but are pretty good. They can be worth as little as a large axle or as much as an apparatus. But since they weigh 32 pounds, they aren't that good at their minimum value, but very good at their maximum value. Still, I've put them one rank below bottles, just because bottles are more consistent and reliable. Bottom of B tier. Moving on to A tier, we have some of the best scraps in the game. The best scraps in A tier are teeth. Like the robot, teeth are noisy and can attract dogs, but that's their only downside. They are weightless and have very high value. They aren't conductive and are one of the best scraps in the game. A tier. Moving down A tier, we have the paintings. Despite being two-handed, paintings are one of the best finds in the game. They have the 5th highest maximum value in the game and aren't conductive. The only downside is that they're quite heavy, weighing 32 pounds. Still one of the best two-handed scraps in the game, and if you find 2 or 3 of these, they can completely change a run. A tier. Next in A tier are the fancy lamps. It's arguable whether or not the fancy lamp is better than the painting or vice versa, but in my opinion I think the painting is better. Basically they are both the same value, but the lamp weighs 10 pounds less and is conductive. The conductivity already loses the lamp points, because both the paintings and lamps are only found on the 3 paid moons, meaning you're more likely to be stuck with a stormy moon. Obviously during a stormy moon, the painting is going to be better, but also the lamp has a really annoying effect when you are holding it. It obscures like 80% of your vision with a blinding light, but both the painting and the lamp are some of the best two-handed scraps in the game. A tier. Moving down A tier, we have the cash register. The cash register is the heaviest scrap item in the game, weighing 84 pounds. It's another two-handed, conductive scrap, and extremely heavy. D tier material, surely. Well, the company would disagree. The cash register has the 2nd highest value in the game of any item, and even though you will probably die from failing a jump since you weigh a ton, it's definitely worth picking this scrap up. High risk, high reward, A tier material. Speaking of high risk, high reward, the next scrap on the list is the Apparatus. The Apparatus is a two-handed special scrap item that has a guaranteed spawn on every facility layout, but they don't spawn on mansion layouts. They will be found in a unique room plugged into the wall. Once you pull the Apparatus out of the wall, the entire facility will lose power and shut down. This means all the lights will turn off, all the terminal operator doors will open, and there is a 70% chance that 2 more entities spawn in the facility. Because of this, it's highly recommended that the Apparatus is the last thing you get. But despite all this effort to get the Apparatus, its heavy weight of 31 pounds and its conductivity, it's still going in the middle of A tier because it has a guaranteed value of $80, making it something you should always get if it's accessible. Next scrap in A tier is the Airhorn. The Airhorn can be used an unlimited number of times to make the funny noise, but despite the trolling potential, it's actually one of the best scraps in the game. It's one-handed, non-conductive, weightless, and is really valuable. There's no reason you wouldn't pick this up. Also, funny noise. Come on. A tier. Also in A tier is the Clown Horn. The clown horn has the exact same stats as the Airhorn, except it's conductive, making it slightly worse. But not really, because funny noise. Anyway, A tier. Moving down A tier, we have the stop sign. The stop sign is a bit of an odd one to rank, because for A tier it's got low value, especially considering its weight and conductivity. But it can be used as a weapon if you don't have a shovel, which may not sound that useful, but the shovel in Lethal Company is really overpowered. You can kill thumpers, spiders, mimics, nutcrackers, snare fleas, and a lot more. With that being said, the shovel is superior in every way, especially after the buff it got, which reduced its weight to 9 pounds. So the stop sign is a tricky one to rank, but I feel that the bottom of A tier is appropriate. And second last in A tier is the Golden Cup. The Golden Cup is always a good find. It's worth quite a lot, is single-handed and non-conductive. The only downside is it weighs 16 pounds, but the value makes up for it. Overall, a pretty good scrap that's worth picking up. A tier. And at the bottom of A tier we have the wedding ring. The wedding ring is very similar to the Golden Cup. The only difference is it's worth a slight bit more and is conductive. The conductivity alone is enough for me to put it slightly lower, but they have the same weight and the same max value, so not much difference there. Bottom of A tier. Finally we move on to S tier, the scrap which can and will save a run almost every time you successfully retrieve them. At the top of S tier in the whole list, the best scrap in the game is obviously the gold bar. The gold bar is the highest valued scrap in the game, with a price almost double the painting and fancy lamp. Not to mention the gold bar is a single-handed item. Now the gold bar does weigh 77 pounds, the second highest weight in the game, and it is conductive, but its value alone carries it and makes it insanely good, but also insanely rare. It has less than a 1% chance to spawn and only spawns on March and experimentation. Still, it's S tier, and easily the best scrap in the game. Ranking second on the list, and with the third highest value in the game, is the Beehive. The circuit Beehive is the definition of high risk, high reward. On paper they sound overpowered. They are very common on March, Vow, Assurance and Experimentation, and can be worth up to $150, almost as much as a cash register. However, unlike the cash register, they have no weight to them. So what's the catch? Well, Beehive. Beehive is the catch. Going near a Beehive is a death sentence for unexperienced players. And stealing a Beehive is even worse. But they are still going in S tier because there's always going to be a meta to stealing them, which if a good player gets the strategy right, they can completely eliminate the risk, making the Beehives free money and very profitable. Ranking third on the list, and in S tier, are perfume bottles. Perfume bottles have the highest value out of any weightless scraps. They only spawn on the 3 hard moons but are actually pretty common, especially when considering their value. From $48 to $104, they are incredibly valuable for a single-handed, weightless, non-conductive item. You can't go wrong with these and they can certainly save a run. S tier. Finally, the last scrap I will be ranking on this list, fourth in S tier, is the Hairdryer. The Hairdryer and the perfume bottle are both just as good as each other, to be honest. The Hairdryer has a minimum value $12 higher and a maximum value $4 lower, but has a weight of 7 pounds. So overall, the Hairdryer might be very slightly less valuable, but it doesn't really matter. Both are S tier and both are really good finds. And that's it. The definitive Lethal Company scrap tier list. There are a few scraps I left out purely because their models didn't fit correctly into the list. And also, the gift box, which is pretty hard to rank because everything about it is random. The laser pointer, which I didn't rank, I would probably put in S tier, below the Hairdryer. It's the second most valuable weightless item and it's basically just a slightly worse version of the perfume bottle, but with a unique ability. The magnifying glass is another one I didn't rank, and it's not all that interesting, but it goes in B tier. It's got similar stats to the Magic 7 ball. I didn't rank the shotgun because I think I'll save that for an equipment ranking video, even though it technically counts as scrap. And the yield sign is just a worse stop sign, so it would be in B or C. Apart from that, I don't think I missed anything and I'm pretty happy with this tier list. Hopefully it helps you decide your runs, and I think it would be especially interesting if some people were using this for the challenge moons to get that real high quota. Let me know in the comments if you're going to be using this as a guide or if you found it useful. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.